Initially, the thought of figuring out how to avoid unintended consequences might seem to be a bit of a difficult undertaking, though actually it's really pretty straightforward. The strategy itself was developed by the stakeholders from looking at the existing structural interactions and what relationships they are responsible for, and figuring out how to make a set of modifications to that structure to actually cause the structure to behave differently in the future. And if you recall the the lecture on the initial lecture about the unsightly growth beneath the bird feeder and the realization that the unsightly growth under the bird feeder, which was perceived as a problem at that point in time, was actually the result of installing a bird feeder 6 months earlier. What that particular lecture pointed out was that unintended consequences typically result from taking actions and not thinking about the implications of those actions into the future. So once this strategy is developed, the way to avoid unintended consequences is to actually go through every element in the resulting relationship structure and envision what that particular element could influence or could be influenced by in the future, which would cause an alteration in the way that it behaved. So that you look at the changes that were made initially, saying, all right, we've increased the resource requirements. How could that actually create a problem in the future? Well, if the resource requirements were defined based upon the expected growth of the business, and if the growth of the business changes, that resource requirement should change because it could be very easy for the business to become over resourced, which ends up costing the business money that it would prefer not to spend. The knowledge base, which is a key component of improving the customer satisfaction, offloading the demand on the support organization, and feeding engineering information about which problems to figure out how to engineer out of the environment. The quality of the content of the knowledge base is critical, and if it's not maintained appropriately, it could actually end up becoming more like a garbage dump than a knowledge base. In which case, the all of the operations in this environment, which are keyed off of that particular function, don't function anymore. So the idea is that you simply have to go through the structure piece by piece by piece and ask yourself the same questions that you asked when you developed the structure to begin with. What does this influence and what influences it? And continue to walk or build out the chain in terms of, well, A influences B and B influences C and C influences D, and you continue to identify them and then determine which ones are perceived to be relevant and which ones aren't. And once you identify potential um, unintended consequences, you then figure out how to mitigate them. So you end up developing a solution which doesn't suffer from unintended consequences by design, by looking at the individual relationships or the individual elements of the relationship and thinking about the influences that were not relevant to the diagram itself to figure out or to understand the problem so you could develop a strategy, though things change. Things are constantly changing in the the context within which this particular set of relationships exists. So you need to spend time and go through it and say, what are the things that could influence this solution? And figure out how to deal with them before they become a problem. Hope you found this informative, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye.